Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Lisa with Lisa Capen Quilts, and this is the last video in our collage style t-shirt vlog series. So we've started at the very beginning and worked our way to this video. In today's video I'm going to show you or bring you along while I do some free motion quilting using my Quilting long arm, and then I'm going to make a binding. I'm going to make a label for this quilt, a little tag that goes in the binding. And then I'll be binding this quilt and sewing on the quilt label that we've made in a previous video. I have a couple of viewer questions that we'll answer in today's video, and then this quilt is all done. So it's been a lot of fun. I hope that this series has been really helpful for you, and I've had a lot of fun featuring your questions, and so I'd like to be able to do that in future series because I think that is really helpful. So I'm going to move you over to the long arm and bring you along as I do some quilting, and then we're going to answer a couple questions from you. So let's go ahead and get started today. Today I've hooked my camera up in a couple different angles, and the first one we're going to show you is looking down onto the quilt while I'm doing some free motion work. For this quilt, I'm doing an all-over meandering stitch from edge to edge, and every once in a while I quilt a little heart, and I like all of my hearts going in different directions so that you can see them right side up no matter which way you are looking or snuggling with the quilt. So I would love some feedback on this angle if you are able to follow along, or does it make you seasick? I'm always trying to figure out great angles to show the quilting. But the last thing I want to do is make anybody queasy just trying to follow along. So for this quilt I am using the AK Trading Company quilting thread. I'm going to post a picture of what that looks like right here, because I have a question from Nancy, and she asked what type of thread do I use for piecing and for quilting. And this AK thread, AK Trading Company thread that I use, I get from Amazon, and it's great for piecing and for quilting, and it's great for using on your domestic machines and your long arm machines. You can also use it in a serger. So it comes 6,000 yards per spool. It is a low lint 100% spun polyester. It's a high strength, and it will not break at high speeds. And you can see I'm going through all of my logos with this thread, and I'm not having any issues with tension or with thread breakage. And so of course all machines are different, and so your machine might like something else, but this is currently one of my favorites. And then my other favorite is from YLI, and I'm going to put the website right here and show you that thread that I like to use, and that also comes 6,000 yards per spool. It is a polycore thread, and it's also great for piecing and for quilting. So here's another angle that I'm going to try out, and then this last angle, which might be a little bit easier to follow along with. We'll quilt this pass together. And of course I've sped all of this up so that we get a good idea of what the quilting looks like, but however, we won't take up a ton of your time. I always find it fascinating to watch people quilt their quilts. It's one of my favorite pastimes, to sit down and watch not only long arm quilting, but quilting on domestic machines as well. So it's one of my favorite things to do. Once we're done quilting, we're going to make some binding, and I'll just quickly show you the process. We've covered that in a ton of other videos, and there's a ton of other video creators who also show you how to make binding. And I don't want to keep repeating the same things over and over in my videos. I think that'll get kind of boring. And then we have a question from Busy Beaver, and I'm going to post her question right here, and she asked what kind of needles do I use And I'll show you those needles, my current favorite needle. And I always say current because sometimes it changes. But right now, these are my favorite needles. And they work great. They're universal. And so it works great with the t-shirt material and the quilter's cotton. And I'm also hoping that showing you the thread has answered your questions as well. And just to let you know, I use a 1/4 inch seam allowance when piecing my quilt tops together. So I ran out of bobbin thread. So I'm replacing the bobbin and we can carry on. But yeah, I think a 1/4 inch seam allowance is pretty standard when quilting. When I make my other projects, sometimes I'll use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and but most of the time I stick with a 1/4 inch seam allowance for my other projects. Always with my quilts though. So y'all see that apron that I'm wearing? I bought it from Joann's. It's entirely way too small and it wraps around my neck. I'm currently trying to figure out an apron pattern that is much more functional for me and crosses in the back and doesn't wrap around my neck. So that's one of my projects that I'm working on in my spare time. Coming back towards the camera. If you ever get an opportunity to play with a long arm at a quilt show, I highly suggest you do it. It is so much fun. And we'll finish up with the quilting demonstration right here. Now I'm going to make some binding. I've already cut 10 strips of fabric. I like to cut my binding strips at 2.5 inches and then fold it over and press all the way down. Again, I'm just bringing you along for part of the process. It's not really a binding tutorial. Just really documenting this quilt. And I know that the person who's receiving this quilt has had a lot of fun watching the videos. And you know, your clients really, pardon me, they love to see the process of their quilt being made. And so I thought that that was fun just to bring her along and show her step by step how we've made her quilt. Once I have my binding done, I'm going to go ahead and make my label. I put a label on all of my quilts now. And I do have a video if you've never seen how I like to embroider on ribbon. I'll put a link to that in the description box below. Just adding some sticky water-soluble stabilizer to the back side of my hoop. I'll place my ribbon right in the middle of the hoop and then tape everything down, and we'll bring you over to the embroidery machine and watch this stitch out my little logo. This is probably one of the primary reasons I got my embroidery machine, was to be able to customize my quilts. I don't do a lot of embroidery on clothing, but I do like to customize my quilts with labels, tags, applique work within the quilts, and so primarily that's what I use my embroidery machine for. I think it's a lot of fun to sit and watch it stitch out, and this just takes 1 minute for it to put my little initials on the ribbon. We'll do this in real time just so you can see how long it takes to add the embroidery to our tag. What I really like about this is that you can use any color ribbon and any color thread to really customize and coordinate with your quilt. Make sure to check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. So let's take a little bit of a closer look. And now we can remove all of the stabilizer. I do have a piece of tearaway underneath. And then I have the sulky water soluble that we'll remove from the back side of the hoop. And then we'll remove all the tape from the front, and I like to use painter's tape because it's a little less tacky. It doesn't pull at the ribbon as much. And now we can trim away the water soluble stabilizer. Fold our label in half, and I just like to use some Elmer's glue to glue it down temporarily. The glue will wash out when I wash the quilt. This just keeps everything in place while I'm actually adding it to our quilt. And I sew this right into the binding, and I'm going to show you that process next in case you haven't seen that. And again, we'll just do part of the binding together. It's not necessarily a binding video. So there's my little tag. And we're ready to start adding the binding to our quilt. So for this quilt, I'm going to attach the binding to the back side of the quilt first. And we'll go through this really quickly. We'll do one corner together. And I'm getting ready to speed up the video in just a second. So now we'll speed it up. We'll do this first corner together. If you've never added a binding to your quilt, and this is your first video that you're watching, I have a ton of binding videos on my channel, so flip through my videos and you'll see some actual binding videos that will be helpful for you. And now we're coming to the part of the quilt where I'm going to add my little tag that we just created. I like to pin that in place so it doesn't shift around underneath the binding. Lay down my binding and finish sewing on the rest of the binding all the way around. And then once it's attached to the back, I'll remove the quilt, flip the quilt over to the pretty side, and we will sew down the binding on the front side. We'll go ahead and skip over to that part. This is probably the fastest way that I do my bindings. Sometimes I'll glue base my bindings in place. But now that I've done this method several quilts now, I've gotten pretty good at it, and I love the results, and it does speed up the process. So this is the way that I've been finishing all of my quilts recently. And I'll just finish sewing down the binding just like this. And we'll speed this up a little bit. We'll show you a little bit. And then we're going to move on to sewing down the quilt label that we created in a previous video. So all of these videos are in a playlist. The link for the playlist is in the description box down below. So you can just start at the very beginning. If you're just tuning in right now, you can watch this quilt being made from the very start to where we are now. And in one of those videos, we created the quilt label that you're about to see right here. So I've already used Fabri-Tac glue and glued this into place so it's permanently there, but I'm also going to hand stitch all the way around the edge, and that will finish up this quilt. I'm extremely slow at hand sewing, so we're not going to watch that whole process. I'll show you a little bit, and then you pretty much know how to do this. If you don't, I do have a video where I sewed the whole label, and maybe that'll be helpful. But I am extremely slow at hand sewing. I think this quilt label is so special. This is a saying that she wanted to have put on her quilt, and so I was able to digitize that with Embroidery. There's a video on that too, showing you how to digitize a quilt label. So you can check that out on my channel. But the quilt label is such a great way to really customize and finish off the quilt. See how slow I am with sewing. And I really thought that I had sped up this part of the video. I guess I did not. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up off camera. And next we're going to take a look at some finished pictures of this quilt before we finish up today. So here we are, my label is all sewn into place, and we will look at this quilt as it is all finished. And you can see my little tag right up there, sewn into the binding. Let's take a closer look at that. I think that's a great way to brand your items that are handmade. And let's take a look at the overall quilt. I love the added patchwork in this quilt. I think it really ties all these shirts in together. That one bright pink t-shirt, our eyes are not drawn specifically to that shirt right away. So our goal was accomplished by adding all the different fabrics and patchwork. I've had so much fun making this quilt, and I'm hoping that she absolutely loves it. We added some applique, we added the names into this quilt, and that also makes it really special. Making this quilt with you has been so much fun. I've really loved the interaction and the questions and the feedback, and I am just so thankful that you are following along. If you haven't already subscribed, I would love it if you hit the subscribe button and the little bell notification, and you'll get notified when I make new videos. Make all kinds of t-shirt videos, art quilts, all kinds of fun, interesting stuff. So I'm really hoping that you follow along in my quilting journey, and really I think it's our quilting journey. So I'm off to throw this quilt into the wash. My client is coming this week to pick it up, and she is so excited, and I'm excited for her. She's waited a long time to have this made. And so this is going to be a special quilt, and I'm just really happy for her. Again, I thank you for following along. I really appreciate the feedback and the thumbs up. And if you have any questions, you can jump down to the comment section, and I'll be glad to help you if I can. Also, if you haven't already joined the Creative Crew group, There's a link in the description box. Go check it out, join our group, and share your accomplishments, share your projects, share your questions. They are so helpful over there, and we would love to have you join us. So until I see you in our next project, I hope you have a fantastic day. We'll see you really soon. Bye.